It was Friday, October 12th, 2018, the beginning of a crisp autumn weekend that promised vibrant foliage and cool, clear air. For 32-year-old Amelia Hayes, it was supposed to be a weekend of solitary reflection, a chance to connect with nature before the onset of winter. What it became was the start of an agonizing mystery, a puzzle of conflicting timelines and carefully constructed lies that would leave a family shattered and a community in disbelief. Amelia Hayes was a woman who seemed to have meticulously designed her own life with the same precision she applied to her work as a rising architect. She was known for her warm smile, her thoughtful nature, and an ambition that was matched only by her kindness. Friends described her as the person you called for sound advice, the one who remembered birthdays and celebrated the small victories of others as if they were her own. Just 6 months prior, she had married Ethan Hayes, a charismatic financial consultant she had met 2 years earlier. Their wedding had been a joyful affair, a celebration of a couple that appeared perfectly matched. Ethan was outgoing and charming, where Amelia was more reserved and introspective. They complemented each other, filling in the spaces the other left empty. They had purchased a beautiful home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a classic colonial that Amelia was already sketching plans to renovate. Her life was a blueprint of happiness, with every structural element seemingly in place. A loving husband, a burgeoning career, a supportive circle of friends, and a future that looked as bright and promising as one of her own architectural designs. The plan for that October weekend was simple and characteristic of Amelia's independent spirit. She was an experienced hiker and intended to drive 2 hours north to the sprawling expanse of the Blackwood State Forest. Her goal was to hike a familiar 10-mile loop, spend the night camping at a designated site, and return home by Sunday evening. Ethan told friends and later investigators that he had helped her pack her gear on Thursday night. He said he kissed her goodbye at 6 o'clock on Friday morning as she headed out in her dark gray sedan, her backpack and camping equipment neatly stowed in the trunk. He had a busy weekend of work to catch up on, he explained, so he stayed behind. Sunday evening arrived, and the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the Hayes' perfectly manicured lawn. By 8 o'clock, there was still no sign of Amelia. Ethan started making calls, first to her cell phone, which went straight to voicemail, and then to a few of her close friends. No one had heard from her since Thursday. At 10:37 in the evening, Ethan Hayes placed a call to the local police department. His voice was thick with worry as he reported his wife, Amelia, missing. He explained her hiking plans, the route she was supposed to take, and the fact that she was now hours overdue. The initial police response was procedural and swift. A missing person report was filed, and an officer was dispatched to the Hayes residence to take a full statement from Ethan. He recounted the events of the weekend, his composure cracking as he described his growing sense of dread. He appeared to be the picture of a concerned husband, frantic with worry. Simultaneously, law enforcement in the county encompassing Blackwood State Forest were notified. Park rangers were instructed to check the parking lot at the trailhead Amelia had intended to use. Within an hour, a ranger confirmed the presence of her dark gray sedan. It was parked neatly in a designated spot, cold and empty. The discovery of the car both confirmed Amelia had made it to the forest and deepened the mystery. It suggested she had begun her hike as planned, but it did not explain why she had not returned. The search began in earnest at first light on Monday morning. Search and rescue teams assembled, a small army of volunteers and professionals in bright orange vests. They fanned out from the trailhead, following the 10-mile loop Amelia was supposed to have hiked. K-9 units sniffed the air, their handlers calling Amelia's name into the dense woods. The search was methodical and exhaustive. Teams scoured the trail, then moved to the more rugged terrain off the designated path. They checked ravines, thickets, and waterways, looking for any sign of a hiker in distress. A dropped water bottle, a piece of torn clothing, anything that might indicate her location. As the hours turned into a full day, the forest remained silent. The dogs found no scent trail leading away from the parking lot. The searchers found no sign of Amelia, her backpack, or any of her camping gear. It was as if she had arrived at the trailhead and simply vanished into thin air. Back home, detectives began the parallel investigation, working to build a timeline of Amelia's last known movements. They started with her husband, Ethan, who willingly sat down for a more detailed interview on Monday afternoon. He reiterated his story, his timeline unwavering. He claimed Amelia had left the house at 6 o'clock on Friday morning. He had spent the day working from his home office, making calls, and answering emails. On Saturday, he had done some yard work and run a few errands. He provided a receipt from a home improvement store, timed at 2:15 on Saturday afternoon. Detectives also began contacting Amelia's friends and family. It was during a call with Amelia's best friend, a woman named Clara Bennett, that the first inconsistency emerged. The first crack appeared in the solid foundation of Ethan's narrative. Clara was distraught, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and confusion. She told the detective that she had plans with Amelia for Friday morning. They had a standing coffee date at 9 o'clock every other Friday, a cherished ritual. Amelia, she insisted, would never have missed it without calling. The detective paused, clarifying the details. Clara was certain their coffee meeting was for that past Friday, October 12th, at 9 in the morning. She had even sent Amelia a text message around 9:15, asking if everything was okay when she did not show up. She never received a reply. This new information was a significant problem. According to Ethan, Amelia was already 3 hours into her drive to Blackwood State Forest by 9 o'clock on Friday morning. According to Clara, Amelia was supposed to be in town, meeting her for coffee. Both stories could not be true. When investigators presented this discrepancy to Ethan, he seemed genuinely perplexed. He suggested that Amelia must have forgotten about the coffee date in her excitement for the trip. He theorized that she probably had her phone turned off to conserve the battery for the weekend, which was why she never saw Clara's text. His explanation was plausible on the surface. People forget appointments. People turn off their phones. But for a woman as organized and considerate as Amelia, it seemed uncharacteristically careless. It was a small detail, but it planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the investigators. They decided to dig deeper into the hours leading up to her supposed departure. They spoke with her colleagues at the architectural firm. They confirmed Amelia had worked a full day on Thursday, leaving the office around 5:30 in the evening. She had been in good spirits, talking excitedly about her solo camping trip. Her co-workers' accounts seemed to support Ethan's version of events. She was planning to go. She was packed and ready. This made Clara's contradictory information all the more puzzling. Was it possible Clara had simply gotten the date of their coffee meeting wrong? Detectives circled back with Clara, who remained adamant. She pulled up the text message on her phone and showed it to them. Sent Friday, October 12th at 9:17 in the morning. It read, "Hey, at the daily grind, everything okay?" The message was marked as delivered, but not read. The investigation now had two divergent timelines. One, provided by the husband, had Amelia leaving for the wilderness at dawn. The other, from her best friend, had her scheduled to be in town for a coffee date she inexplicably missed. Reconciling these two realities became the central focus of the case. Meanwhile, the search in Blackwood State Forest continued into its second and third days. A helicopter was brought in to survey the vast landscape from the air, its rotors beating a rhythmic pulse of hope against the quiet canopy of trees. But the aerial search proved as fruitless as the one on the ground. Investigators at the scene processed Amelia's car. They found it locked, with no signs of forced entry or a struggle. Inside, everything was orderly. A half-empty bottle of water sat in the cup holder, and a pair of sunglasses rested on the passenger seat. Nothing seemed out of place. They checked the trunk. It was empty. There was no backpack, no tent, no sleeping bag, no camping gear whatsoever. This was another troubling detail. If Amelia had arrived to go hiking, where was her equipment? Ethan had an answer for this as well. He explained that Amelia often preferred to get her gear on and start her hike right from the car, leaving nothing behind. It was possible, he argued, that she was carrying everything with her. This was also plausible, but combined with the timeline discrepancy, it added to a growing sense of unease. Music. As the first week of the investigation drew to a close, the search in the state forest was scaled back. The official position was that they had exhausted all viable search areas. Privately, search commanders admitted they had found no evidence to suggest Amelia had ever entered the woods at all. The focus shifted almost entirely to the investigative track back in her hometown. Detectives requested access to Amelia's phone records and bank statements. They wanted to see if her digital footprint could resolve the conflict in the timeline. The phone records were the first to come back. They showed her phone had been powered on and active on Thursday evening. It had connected to cell towers near her home. The last outgoing activity was a short text exchange with her sister at around 8 o'clock on Thursday night. After that, the phone went silent. There were no outgoing calls or texts. The records confirmed the incoming text from Clara at 9:17 on Friday morning. Critically, the data showed that at the time Clara's text was received, Amelia's phone was still within the coverage area of the cell tower that serviced her own home. This was a bombshell. If Amelia's phone was still at or near her house at 9:17 on Friday morning, she could not have been on her way to Blackwood State Forest. Ethan's timeline, the very foundation of his story, was now directly contradicted by electronic evidence. When confronted with the cell tower data, Ethan's composure finally began to fray. He became flustered, searching for an explanation. He suggested that perhaps Amelia had forgotten her phone and he had not realized it. He then amended his story, saying maybe she had two phones, a personal one and a work one, and had taken the wrong one. Both were weak explanations that investigators quickly dismissed. Amelia had only one phone, a fact confirmed by her family and her employer. The idea that she, a meticulous planner, would forget her only means of communication on a solo wilderness trip seemed incredibly unlikely. Detectives now looked at Ethan Hayes not as a grieving husband, but as a person of interest. His story had changed, and the physical evidence did not support his initial claims. They needed more than just a suspicious timeline. They needed concrete proof of foul play. They began to look into Ethan's life with a new level of scrutiny. They executed a search warrant for the Hayes' home. The house was immaculate, almost sterile. A forensics team went through every room, looking for any sign of a struggle or violence. On the surface, they found nothing. They also obtained warrants for Ethan's financial records. It was here that a new, disturbing picture began to emerge. Far from the successful financial consultant he portrayed himself to be, Ethan Hayes was in serious financial trouble. He had significant credit card debt and had recently suffered major losses on a series of risky investments. The most alarming discovery, however, was a life insurance policy. Just 2 months after their wedding, Ethan had taken out a $2 million policy on Amelia's life. He was the sole beneficiary. Suddenly, a powerful motive had materialized from the sterile columns of financial data. The case against Ethan was building, but it was still circumstantial. He had a motive, and he had lied about the timeline of his wife's disappearance. But investigators still had no crime scene, and most importantly, no body. Without Amelia, they could not prove a crime had even been committed. Publicly, the search for Amelia continued. Her family made emotional pleas to the media, holding up photographs of a smiling, vibrant Amelia and begging for any information that could help find her. Ethan stood beside them, playing the part of the distraught husband, his arm around Amelia's grieving mother. For those watching at home, it was a heartbreaking scene. For the detectives watching from the sidelines, it was a chilling performance. They were increasingly convinced that the man comforting Amelia's family was the very person responsible for their pain. The investigation entered a frustrating period of stagnation. Detectives re-interviewed friends, neighbors, and colleagues, hoping to uncover some new detail they had missed. They asked neighbors if they had seen or heard anything unusual on the Thursday night or Friday morning of Amelia's disappearance. Most had not. It was a quiet neighborhood where people kept to themselves. One neighbor recalled seeing Ethan doing yard work on Saturday, just as he had claimed. Another remembered seeing Amelia's car pull out of the driveway early on Friday morning, which seemed to corroborate Ethan's story. This piece of information was a setback for the investigators. The neighbor, an elderly man who sat by his window every morning, was quite certain he had seen the gray sedan leave around 6 o'clock. He could not see the driver clearly, but assumed it was Amelia. This created more confusion. Was it possible Ethan was telling the truth about the car leaving, even if the cell phone data suggested Amelia was not in it? Could someone else have taken her car? The theory felt convoluted, but they could not dismiss it. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. The case grew cold. The media attention faded, and the public's memory began to move on. But for Amelia's family and the dedicated team of detectives, the search for answers was a constant, gnawing ache. They knew they were missing a key piece of the puzzle. Music. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, 3 months after Amelia vanished. It came not from a new piece of evidence or a witness interview, but from a routine follow-up call. A detective was canvassing the neighborhood one last time, checking in with residents who had been on vacation or unavailable during the initial investigation. He knocked on the door of a house 2 doors down from the Hayes residence. The couple who lived there, the Millers, had been on an extended trip to Europe and had only returned a week prior. They had been saddened to learn of the tragedy that had befallen their neighbor, but told the detective they had been out of the country and could not have seen anything. As the detective was about to leave, Mr. Miller mentioned something offhandedly. He was a technology enthusiast and had recently installed a new high-definition home security system. He said the cameras covered his front yard and parts of the street, and that the system stored footage in the cloud for 90 days. The detective's pulse quickened. The 90-day window meant that any footage from the weekend Amelia disappeared was just about to be automatically deleted. He asked the Millers if he could review the footage from their cameras. They readily agreed, hoping they could help in some small way. Together, they sat at the Millers' dining room table and pulled up the archived video from the morning of Friday, October 12th. They fast-forwarded the footage to just before 6 o'clock. The camera angle provided a clear, unobstructed view of the street, including the driveway of the Hayes residence. At 5:58 in the morning, the video showed the garage door of the Hayes house opening. A moment later, Amelia's dark gray sedan backed out of the driveway and drove down the street. It was exactly what the elderly neighbor had described and what Ethan had claimed. The detective felt a pang of disappointment. The footage seemed to confirm Ethan's story. But he kept watching. He knew from the cell phone records that Amelia's phone had still been at the house after 9 o'clock. Something was still wrong. He continued to watch the footage from that morning. He saw the school bus make its usual stop. He saw neighbors leaving for work. The street was quiet. Then, at 8:45, the camera captured something that changed the entire course of the investigation. A rideshare vehicle pulled up and stopped a few houses down from the Hayes residence. A man got out of the car. He was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. But as he walked up the street, he passed directly in front of the Miller's camera. It was unmistakably Ethan Hayes. The detective watched, mesmerized, as Ethan walked to his own house, unlocked the front door, and went inside. He had not been home working all day as he had claimed. He had left and returned just before 9 o'clock. The detective then had a sudden realization. He asked Mr. Miller to rewind the footage to the moment Amelia's car had left the driveway that morning. They zoomed in on the image, enhancing the resolution as much as possible. The driver's side window was tinted, but the morning sun hit it at just the right angle. Through the glass, they could just make out the silhouette of the driver. The person was wearing a baseball cap, and their build, their posture, was not that of Amelia. It was the build of a man. It was the build of Ethan Hayes. The pieces of the puzzle began to slam into place. Ethan had lied. He had not been home all morning. He had driven Amelia's car away from the house at 6 o'clock, parked it somewhere, and then taken a rideshare back to his own neighborhood to create the illusion that he had been home the entire time. The next step was to find out where he had taken the car. The detective team subpoenaed the records for the rideshare company. They found the trip record for that morning. Ethan had been picked up from a small commercial area, just a mile from the entrance to Blackwood State Forest. The timeline was now devastatingly clear. Ethan had driven Amelia's car 2 hours north, left it at the trailhead, and then taken a rideshare service all the way back home. He had spent the entire morning, from 6 o'clock until almost 9, meticulously staging a scene and creating a false alibi. This evidence transformed the case. Investigators now had proof of a calculated deception, a deliberate effort to mislead them. They secured a new, more comprehensive warrant to search the Hayes residence and Ethan's personal vehicle. This time, they knew what they were looking for. In the garage, the forensics team sprayed luminol, a chemical that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin to reveal the presence of blood, even if it has been cleaned up. Under the black lights, a large area of the concrete floor glowed with a ghostly blue luminescence. Someone had spilled a significant amount of blood and had tried desperately to wash it away. DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Amelia Hayes. The quiet suburban garage was their crime scene. The investigators now had the motive, the evidence of a cover-up, and the physical proof of a violent struggle. They finally had what they needed to arrest Ethan Hayes. They brought him into the interrogation room, the same room where he had first played the part of the worried husband. This time, the tone was different. They did not ask him questions. They laid out the facts. They showed him the security camera footage. They showed him the rideshare receipt. They told him about the blood in the garage. Ethan's face, once a mask of concern, collapsed into a portrait of defeat. His denials grew weaker, his explanations more frantic and nonsensical. Finally, as the weight of the evidence crushed him, he broke. The full horrific story of Amelia's final hours came pouring out. The argument had started on Thursday night. Amelia had discovered the extent of Ethan's financial deception. She had found statements showing his massive debts and the risky investments that had failed. She confronted him, telling him their marriage was built on a foundation of lies. She had told him she was leaving him. She was going to stay with her sister for the weekend to think, not going on a hiking trip. In that moment, Ethan saw his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He saw not the loss of his wife, but the loss of his comfortable lifestyle, the exposure of his failures. His panic turned to rage. He had followed her into the garage, and as she was about to get into her car, he attacked her. The struggle was brief and brutal. In a fit of violence, he had ended the life of the woman he had promised to love and protect. The rest of his actions were born of cold, calculated self-preservation. He spent the entire night cleaning the garage. He then set about creating the hiking alibi, a story he had likely been formulating for some time as his financial situation worsened, and he saw the $2 million insurance policy as his only way out. He used Amelia's own love for the outdoors against her, weaving a plausible narrative that would send investigators on a literal wild goose chase, searching a forest miles away while the truth was hidden beneath a coat of concrete paint on his garage floor. After his confession, Ethan Hayes, motivated by a desperate desire to mitigate his sentence, finally agreed to tell investigators where he had hidden Amelia's body. He led them not to the vast wilderness of Blackwood State Forest, but to a dense, undeveloped patch of woods just 20 minutes from their home. He had wrapped her body in a construction tarp he had in the garage and buried her in a shallow grave, convinced she would never be found. It was a final, callous act of concealment, an attempt to erase her from the world entirely. The recovery of Amelia's remains brought a devastating end to her family's desperate hope for her safe return. The news conference that followed was a somber affair. The police chief detailed the arrest and the confession, praising the tireless work of his detectives and the critical role of the neighbor's security camera. Ethan Hayes was charged with first-degree murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming: the confession, the financial motive, the forensic evidence from the garage, and the digital trail that had unraveled his intricate web of lies. He pleaded guilty to avoid a trial and the public airing of his brutal betrayal. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, Amelia's family delivered powerful victim impact statements. Her mother spoke of a daughter whose light had been extinguished by pure greed and selfishness. Her sister described the void her absence had left, a permanent emptiness in the heart of their family. Ethan Hayes remained impassive throughout the sentencing, a hollowed-out man who had traded his wife's life for nothing. His grand plan to collect $2 million and start a new life had failed, undone by a text message, a cell tower ping, and the unblinking eye of a neighbor's security camera. The case of Amelia Hayes served as a tragic reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a perfect facade. She had fallen in love with a charming man, never knowing the deep-seated deception and desperation that lurked beneath the surface. Her meticulously planned life had been derailed and destroyed by the one person she should have been able to trust the most. Her architectural firm established a scholarship in her name, ensuring that her legacy would be one of creation and ambition, helping young, aspiring architects to build their own dreams. It was a small but meaningful gesture to honor a life defined by its potential, a life that had been dedicated to building beautiful things. The community was left to grapple with the chilling reality that the monster was not a stranger lurking in the woods, but a husband in a quiet suburban home. The story became a cautionary tale, a stark illustration of how the most ordinary settings can become the backdrop for the most extraordinary evil. Amelia Hayes was not the victim of a random accident in the wilderness. She was the victim of a calculated plot, a murder disguised as a misadventure. If you found this case compelling, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell to stay updated on similar true crime investigations. Until next time, stay alert, stay compassionate, and never underestimate the importance of looking out for those around you.